Imagine this, it's a regular day. Your alarm blares and you're already behind. Emails pile up faster than you can read them. Your mind is racing about deadlines, and somewhere in the background, there's this little voice saying, "Is this it? Is this what life is supposed to feel like?" You shake it off and push forward, because what else can you do? But that uneasy feeling lingers, like a dull hum you can't quite tune out. Now, hold on to that thought for a second, because what if I told you there's a way to quiet the noise? Not by running away from your responsibilities or pretending your problems don't exist, but by simply shifting how you show up in each moment. What if the peace you're chasing isn't out there, in some future vacation or dream job, but already here, waiting for you to notice it? Sounds too good to be true, right? But hear me out. There's this practice, mindfulness, and it's like finding the pause button in the chaos of life. At its core, it's about paying attention. Not the kind of attention you give to your phone when you're doom scrolling, but the kind that roots you in the here and now. And before you roll your eyes and think, "Great, another buzzword," let me tell you about the guy who brought this to the forefront, Jon Kabat-Zinn. Ever heard of him? If not, you're about to. Picture this. A scientist with a knack for meditation who thought, what if we took these ancient practices, stripped away the religious stuff, and made it accessible for people who'd never set foot in a monastery? That's exactly what Kabat-Zinn did. He wasn't trying to sell you enlightenment or some mystical experience. He was grounded in science, working with people facing chronic pain, anxiety, and stress. The results? Let's just say they weren't subtle. But why should you care? Because this isn't just for monks or wellness gurus. It's for you. The person who's juggling work, relationships, and that never-ending to-do list. It's for the parent trying to keep their cool when the kids are screaming. It's for anyone who's ever thought, I just need a break. So, stick around, because we're diving into how mindfulness works, why it's backed by science, and how it might just be the thing you didn't know you needed. By the end, you might look at your life and yourself differently. And who knows? Maybe the peace you've been chasing has been right here all along. Chapter 1. What is mindfulness? Unpacking the essence ***. Have you ever had a meal that was so delicious? You could almost feel the flavors dancing on your tongue, each bite rich with taste, texture, and satisfaction? And then, have you ever eaten a meal where, before you even realized it, your plate was empty, and you couldn't remember the last few bites? In those moments, it's clear. You were either fully present or you were somewhere else entirely, lost in thought, autopilot switched on. That's mindfulness in a nutshell, paying attention on purpose in the present moment non-judgmentally. It sounds simple enough, right? But there's a lot packed into that simple definition, and truly understanding it requires us to slow down and explore what it means to live in the moment. When we're mindfully present, we're engaged with the now, not distracted by the past or future. It's about noticing everything as it is, without trying to change it or judge it. Just as you can savor every moment of a perfect meal, you can savor every moment of life itself. You might be thinking, okay, sure, but life is way more complicated than a meal. You're absolutely right. Life can feel like a whirlwind of constant motion. But this is precisely why mindfulness is so powerful. It allows us to stop, breathe, and reset in a world that constantly asks for more of us. Mindfulness doesn't require us to change the chaos around us. It's about shifting how we interact with that chaos. Let's dive into what this looks like in real life. Imagine you're sitting in traffic. For most of us, that's a perfect recipe for frustration. The seconds feel like minutes, the minutes drag on, and before you know it, you're on the verge of road rage. But what if, instead of focusing on how late you are or how much you hate being stuck, you simply noticed your thoughts and feelings as they arose? Oh, I'm feeling frustrated right now, you might observe. I notice my body tightening up. And then, without judgment, you could choose to breathe, soften your grip on the steering wheel, and bring your focus back to the present moment. The traffic hasn't changed, but how you experience it has. That's mindfulness, learning to pause, acknowledge, and allow yourself to simply be, rather than reacting or running from your emotions. Mindfulness, at its core, is rooted in the ancient Buddhist tradition, where it's known as sati, a practice of awareness and remembrance. Buddhists believe Mindfulness is one of the key factors leading to enlightenment, and its purpose is to bring clarity to the mind, allowing individuals to see things as they truly are. It's about waking up to life and experiencing it fully, without the distortions of our habitual thoughts, judgments, or expectations. Now, let's be clear, when we talk about mindfulness in the modern world, it's often stripped of the spiritual or religious context that many people associate with it. Jon Kabat-Zinn, the founder of the mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR program, is largely responsible for making mindfulness accessible to those who don't identify with any particular faith. He took mindfulness from the Buddhist monastery and brought it into hospitals, schools, workplaces, and homes across the globe, showing that it could be a practical tool for anyone, whether or not they believed in karma, meditation, or nirvana. But what does that look like exactly? Kabat-Zinn's work with people suffering from chronic pain is a perfect example. In the 1970s, he introduced mindfulness into pain management, helping patients cope with conditions like fibromyalgia, arthritis, and back pain. Instead of just focusing on alleviating symptoms with medication, Kabat-Zinn's approach encouraged patients to sit with their pain, notice it, and experience it without resistance. It might sound counterintuitive at first. Why would you want to focus on pain? But mindfulness helps us create a space between stimulus and response. This space allows us to observe our reactions to pain without letting it control us. For many people, this practice led to profound shifts. They didn't necessarily experience less pain, but they found a new way of relating to it. They discovered that by becoming present with their pain, they could lessen its power over them. In a way, mindfulness offers a type of freedom that we don't often consider. It frees us from the relentless grip of our thoughts. It frees us from rehashing the past or fearing the future. And it frees us from the judgment that clouds our experiences. Think about it. How many times have you been on a walk, enjoying the beauty of the world around you, only to have your mind wander off into a worry about something that happened last week or something you think might happen next month? This is normal, of course. We're human, and our brains are wired to jump between past and future. But mindfulness invites us to come back to the present, over and over again. So, how does mindfulness actually change things for people? Let me tell you about someone I'll call Sarah. Sarah was an overworked mom, juggling a full-time job, raising 2 kids, and running a household. She was stressed, exhausted, and constantly felt like she was falling short. She'd heard about mindfulness from a friend, but wasn't convinced it could help someone with her level of busyness. But then, one day, she found herself in a quiet moment at home, feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. That's when she remembered her friend's suggestion. She sat down, closed her eyes, and started with her breath. Nothing fancy, just breathing in, breathing out, noticing her thoughts as they came and went, and gently returning to her breath when she got distracted. After about 10 minutes, she noticed a subtle shift. She felt more grounded. Her mind, which usually raced with worries, felt calmer. The real magic happened when Sarah took mindfulness into her daily life. She started practicing it when doing simple tasks like washing dishes, folding laundry, or listening to her kids. She noticed how much more present she became in her interactions. Instead of rushing through her day, she began to savor moments, like the feel of warm water on her hands or the sound of her daughter's laugh. She was still busy, but her experience of life started to shift. She wasn't just surviving her day, she was living it. And that's what mindfulness does. It turns the mundane into something meaningful. Sarah's story isn't unique. All around the world, people are discovering mindfulness and experiencing similar shifts. For some, it's about gaining control over stress. For others, it's about cultivating deeper relationships, healing emotional wounds, or simply learning how to breathe through challenging moments. And that's the beauty of mindfulness. It's a practice that meets you where you are, whether you're facing a tough time or simply seeking more peace in your daily life. It's important to understand that mindfulness isn't about trying to fix everything. It's not about finding a quick fix for your problems or expecting instant results. It's about creating a habit of awareness, of seeing things as they are without judgment. It's about being kind to yourself, even when you mess up, and learning how to navigate life's ups and downs with grace. As you dive deeper into mindfulness, you'll start to see how much power there is in being present. You'll start to notice the things you've been missing, the way your body feels when you're stressed, the little moments of joy that you've overlooked, the subtle shifts in your thoughts and emotions. This awareness is the key to change. Once you notice something, you can't unnotice it. And once you're aware of your patterns, you can start to make choices that align with your values and intentions. So, what does mindfulness really give you? It gives you the ability to choose how you show up in each moment. It gives you the freedom to be present, not caught up in the past or future. It offers clarity in a world that's often cloudy with distractions. And, maybe most importantly, it helps you reconnect with yourself in a way that feels deeply nourishing. Now that you've got a taste of what mindfulness is and how it can transform your life, we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore, and the best part is, every step of the way, you'll be learning how to bring more peace and presence into your daily life. So, stick with me. The journey's only beginning. Chapter 2. The Science of Being Present. Let's talk about your brain for a moment. That little organ between your ears, which you often forget is working overtime even when you're not. It's processing thousands of thoughts, emotions, and sensations every single second, and often, it feels like it's running on autopilot. Just like when you're stuck in traffic, or worse, when you're scrolling through endless social media posts without realizing how much time has passed. But here's the kicker. Science is showing us that mindfulness can change the way your brain works. Quite literally. You see, the practice of mindfulness isn't just some abstract concept or feel-good trend. It's deeply rooted in neuroscience. It's a way to train your brain. Yes, your brain to become more focused, resilient, and calm. And, as research increasingly shows, mindfulness doesn't just offer temporary relief from stress. It has the power to actually rewire your brain. Now, before you start imagining a bunch of scientists with fancy equipment poking around inside your skull, let's take a look at something more accessible: neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Just like the body can build muscle with exercise, the brain can build new patterns of thought and behavior through consistent practice. It's like reprogramming a computer. With the right input, you can change how the system functions. And mindfulness is one of the most effective tools to do just that. When you practice mindfulness regularly, you're not just calming your mind or focusing on your breath. You're training your brain to be more aware, less reactive, and better at managing stress. Studies have shown that mindfulness can increase gray matter in the brain, specifically in areas responsible for memory, emotional regulation, and empathy. So, with consistent practice, your brain becomes better at handling life's challenges, not just in the moment but over time. Here's an interesting example. Researchers at Harvard University conducted a study in 2011 where they used brain scans to compare the brains of people who practiced mindfulness with those who didn't. The results were striking. The mindfulness group had noticeable increases in gray matter in the hippocampus, responsible for memory and learning, and a decrease in the size of the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and stress responses. In short, the people who practiced mindfulness were physically rewiring their brains to be more calm, more focused, and less stressed. But let's talk about stress for a minute. We've all experienced it. Whether it's the pressure of deadlines, relationship struggles, or just trying to keep up with the pace of modern life. And while a little stress is normal and even helpful, chronic stress is a different beast. It can damage your body, your mind, and your relationships. That's where mindfulness truly shines. In fact, one of the most well-researched applications of mindfulness is in managing stress. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, is a structured program created by Jon Kabat-Zinn in the late 1970s. The idea behind MBSR is simple. By teaching people to pay attention to their thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations without judgment, they can reduce the impact of stress on their bodies and minds. And the results have been profound. Take, for instance, the story of James, a participant in an MBSR program. James had been living with chronic pain for years, a result of an old injury that just wouldn't heal. The pain was constant, and over time, it had seeped into every part of his life. He was irritable, exhausted, and feeling hopeless. But after attending an MBSR course, something shifted. Through mindfulness practice, James learned to approach his pain not as an enemy to fight, but as something to observe. Instead of getting tangled up in frustration, he could now notice the sensations in his body, breathe through the discomfort, and give himself the space to simply exist with it. The results weren't magical. His pain didn't disappear, but his relationship with it changed. And in that change, he found a new sense of peace. Another story comes from a woman named Sarah, who had long suffered from anxiety. She tried everything, therapy, medication, yoga, but nothing seemed to stick. That was until she tried mindfulness. First, it was challenging. Her mind would wander constantly, and sitting still felt nearly impossible. But slowly, Sarah began to notice something. Her anxiety, which once felt like an uncontrollable wave crashing over her, started to feel more like a passing cloud. By observing her anxious thoughts without judgment, Sarah found that she could let them come and go without attaching to them. Over time, her anxiety diminished. It wasn't overnight, but the more she practiced, the more she found herself able to respond to life's challenges from a place of calm instead of fear. These are just a few examples of how MBSR has helped people manage chronic pain, anxiety, and stress. In fact, a growing body of research backs up the benefits of mindfulness. Studies show that MBSR can significantly reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression, improve sleep quality, and even lower blood pressure. It's no wonder that mindfulness is now being used in hospitals, schools, workplaces, and even military settings as a tool for mental health and well-being. But let's not get too carried away. As with any practice, mindfulness has its skeptics. Some argue that the evidence isn't strong enough, or that mindfulness is just a temporary band-aid for deeper, more complex issues. And while it's true that mindfulness isn't a cure-all, the research is compelling. More and more studies are being conducted to examine its effects on everything from brain chemistry to immune function. The results thus far suggest that mindfulness offers significant, lasting benefits for mental health, physical health, and overall well-being. Of course, mindfulness isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It takes time, patience, and practice. It's not about achieving perfection, but about building awareness and understanding over time. Mindfulness requires commitment, and in a world that often values instant gratification, that can feel like a big ask. But that's the beauty of it. As with anything that's truly worthwhile, the rewards of mindfulness are earned, not given. And when you stick with it, the benefits are undeniable. So, is mindfulness the miracle cure some people think it is? Not exactly. But is it one of the most powerful tools we have for managing stress, improving mental health, and rewiring our brains? Absolutely. And as more research continues to come out, it's clear that mindfulness is more than just a trend. It's a practice that holds the potential to change lives for the better. In the next chapters, we'll explore how you can start bringing mindfulness into your own life. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, improve focus, or simply experience more peace in your daily routine. The science shows that the benefits are real, and now it's time for you to experience them for yourself. So, stay with me. There's so much more to discover about the profound effects of mindfulness on your life. Chapter 3. Starting the journey. Mindfulness in daily life. Imagine you've just sat down to practice mindfulness for the first time. Maybe you've set aside a quiet space in your home, turned off your phone, and closed your eyes. You begin with a simple instruction. Focus on your breath. In. But then, something happens. Your mind, which seemed relatively calm just a minute ago, begins to race. Thoughts flood in: work, family, the pile of laundry you've been avoiding, and of course, the nagging reminder that you're supposed to be focusing on your breath. You try to bring your attention back, but the thoughts keep coming. This is the experience of almost everyone when they first start practicing mindfulness. It's not a flaw or failure. It's part of the process. The mind is like a busy train station. Constant activity, constant motion. But the beauty of mindfulness lies in its simplicity. Learning to step back, notice the chaos, and gently bring yourself back to the present. It's a practice that's less about controlling your thoughts and more about accepting them as they are, without judgment. Take, for example, Mark. Mark was new to mindfulness, and like many beginners, he struggled to sit still. At first, every little ache in his body seemed to pull his attention away from his breath. His back hurt, his legs were restless, and his mind was all over the place. He felt like he wasn't doing it right, but after a few weeks of sticking with it, something unexpected happened. Mark began to notice the subtle sensations in his body. He could feel the tension in his shoulders and the tightness in his chest, and instead of trying to push those feelings away, he simply observed them. Slowly, Mark learned to stay present with those sensations, rather than fighting against them. And that's when the profound insights began to emerge. Mark realized that his discomfort wasn't the problem, it was his resistance to it. By practicing mindfulness, he wasn't just learning to sit still or breathe deeply. He was learning to be present with whatever arose, whether it was discomfort, anxiety, or joy. And in doing so, he discovered a deeper sense of peace within himself. The struggle was no longer a struggle. It was just part of the experience. But let's be honest. Mindfulness is not always easy, especially when you're first starting out. You'll encounter obstacles, some more persistent than others. Restlessness, for instance, is a common challenge. It's difficult to sit still and focus when your mind is constantly jumping from one thing to the next. And that's where compassion comes in. Mindfulness isn't about forcing yourself to be perfect. It's about meeting yourself where you are. When restlessness arises, instead of judging it as wrong, you can simply observe it, acknowledge it, and bring your attention back to your breath without self-criticism. Over time, this practice of gentle observation creates a new relationship with discomfort. It no longer has to derail your entire experience. Self-judgment is another obstacle that many beginners face. It's easy to feel frustrated or discouraged when your mind wanders. You might think, I'm not good at this. Or, I can't even focus for 5 minutes, what's the point? But mindfulness is not about achieving a particular state of mind. It's about becoming aware of your current state and accepting it. The practice itself is in the awareness, not in getting it right. Each time you catch yourself judging or criticizing your experience, that's an opportunity to practice mindfulness. You notice the judgment, let it go, and return to the present moment. Then there's doubt. Doubt often creeps in, especially when you don't see immediate results. Mindfulness is subtle. It's not about quick fixes or instant gratification. It's easy to wonder, is this really working? But like any skill, mindfulness requires patience and consistency. The benefits may not always be obvious at first, but as you continue to practice, you'll begin to notice shifts. Maybe it's a deeper sense of calm when stress arises, or maybe it's the ability to be more present with your loved ones. The changes are often gradual, but they're real. Trust the process, and trust that even when it feels like nothing is happening, mindfulness is working its magic behind the scenes. One of the most transformative aspects of mindfulness is its ability to be woven into the fabric of your daily life. Sure, setting aside time to meditate is important, but mindfulness isn't limited to the cushion. It's a practice that extends into every moment of your day. In fact, some of the most profound mindfulness practices happen during everyday activities, when you're walking, eating, listening, or even doing the dishes. Mindful walking is a great example. Next time you go for a walk, try this. Instead of rushing to get from point A to point B, focus on the sensation of each step. Notice how your feet feel as they make contact with the ground. Pay attention to the movement of your body and the rhythm of your breath. As you walk, engage your senses, notice the sounds around you, the colors, the smells. Walking becomes more than just a means of getting somewhere. It becomes an opportunity to connect with the present moment. Mindful eating is another way to bring mindfulness into your day. How often do you eat your meals without truly tasting them? It's easy to rush through a meal while watching TV or scrolling through your phone. But mindfulness invites you to slow down and savor each bite. Notice the textures, the flavors, the way the food nourishes your body. Eating mindfully doesn't just enhance the experience. It can also improve digestion and help with portion control. Mindful listening is an often overlooked practice that can transform the way you interact with others. Next time you have a conversation, try to truly listen. Instead of thinking about what you're going to say next, or judging what the other person is saying, simply focus on being fully present with them. Pay attention to their words, their tone, and their body language. This kind of listening deepens relationships and fosters a sense of connection that goes beyond the surface level. These small, everyday practices are where the real power of mindfulness lies. It's not just about meditation or formal practices. It's about integrating mindfulness into every aspect of your life. When you start bringing mindfulness into your daily routines, you begin to experience life more fully. The world slows down a little, and you start noticing things you've missed in the past. Whether it's the warmth of the sun on your face, the sound of laughter, or the feeling of gratitude as you sip your morning coffee. Of course, there will be days when mindfulness feels harder than others. There will be moments of doubt, restlessness, and frustration. But that's the beauty of the practice. It's a journey, not a destination. Every time you return to the present moment, no matter how many times your mind wanders, you're strengthening the muscle of mindfulness. It's about progress, not perfection. So, if you're just starting out on this journey, don't worry if you struggle at first. The road to mindfulness is full of twists and turns, but every step brings you closer to a life filled with more peace, more clarity, and more connection. And remember, there's no right or wrong way to practice mindfulness. There's just your way. Trust that as you continue on this path, you'll begin to see the world in a whole new light, one moment at a time. Chapter 4. The Art of Attention. Observing without judgment. Imagine, for a moment, you're sitting in your living room when you hear the unmistakable sound of your child's voice escalating into a tantrum. Perhaps it's over a small thing like not getting their favorite snack, or perhaps something more complex. The instinctive reaction for most parents in that moment is one of frustration or anxiety. You might feel your heart rate spike, your patience thinning, and your mind immediately racing with thoughts like, asterisk, why won't they just listen? Asterisk or asterisk. I've had enough of this today. Asterisk, it's a familiar scene, one we've all experienced at some point, right? But let's pause here and consider something different. What if, instead of reacting with that immediate rush of frustration, you took a breath, stepped back, and observed the situation with mindfulness? Now, I'm not saying it's easy to remain calm in the heat of the moment. In fact, it's far from simple. But here's where mindfulness offers a game-changing perspective. By practicing non-judgmental awareness, you can begin to notice your emotions without immediately reacting to them. In that same scenario, rather than diving headfirst into frustration, you might recognize that the feeling is there, but you don't have to let it dictate your actions. You can observe the emotional waves rising within you, but you don't need to identify with them. I am frustrated might turn into asterisk. I notice that I'm feeling frustrated. Asterisk, this subtle shift changes everything. Non-judgmental awareness, as simple as it sounds, is a profound tool. It involves noticing your thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they are, without labeling them as good or bad, right or wrong. This is where mindfulness truly works its magic. Most of the time, we live in a state of automatic reactivity. We react to situations and people without taking a moment to consider the emotions, thoughts, and perceptions behind those reactions. We label them, judge them, and let them drive our behavior. But non-judgmental awareness offers a chance to pause, to step back and see things as they truly are, without the overlay of judgment or criticism. Take the example of the parent and the child again. Imagine, instead of reacting to the tantrum with irritation or anger, the parent simply observes. They might notice the tightness in their chest, the tension in their jaw, the rush of impatience. But they also notice the child's distress, the need for comfort, and perhaps their own feelings of overwhelm. By practicing non-judgmental awareness, the parent can recognize that their frustration is a natural response, but it doesn't have to control them. They might choose to respond with calmness instead of reactivity, perhaps by offering a reassuring touch or simply acknowledging the child's feelings, without feeling the need to fix the situation immediately. This shift from reacting to responding with mindfulness can change the dynamic entirely, leading to more connection and less conflict. This concept of non-judgmental awareness extends far beyond parenting. It touches every aspect of life, from how we deal with stress at work, to how we approach our relationships, to how we respond to our own inner critics. Often, we are our harshest judges, berating ourselves for every mistake, every misstep, and every imperfection. We get caught in a cycle of self-criticism, which only serves to amplify our feelings of inadequacy. But when we learn to notice those critical thoughts without judgment, we begin to create space for compassion. Take Jenna, for instance. Jenna had struggled with perfectionism for most of her life. She always felt like she had to be the best at everything, whether it was in her career, her friendships, or her personal life. This pressure led to constant self-criticism. If something didn't go as planned, Jenna's first reaction was to berate herself. I should have done better. Or asterisk, I'm not good enough. Asterisk, but after starting mindfulness practice, Jenna began to notice these critical thoughts without attaching to them. Instead of immediately believing that she was a failure, she learned to recognize that these thoughts were just thoughts, temporary and passing. She began to separate her self-worth from her actions, allowing herself to make mistakes and learn from them without self-judgment. This shift didn't happen overnight, but it fundamentally changed the way Jenna interacted with herself, making her more resilient and self-compassionate. Resilience is an essential aspect of mindfulness that often gets overlooked. It's easy to think of mindfulness as something that simply helps reduce stress or improve focus. But at its core, mindfulness is about developing resilience, the ability to navigate life's challenges without being thrown off course. When we practice non-judgmental awareness, we stop reacting out of fear, shame, or frustration. Instead, we learn to face difficult situations with clarity, presence, and understanding. This doesn't mean we won't feel negative emotions, of course we will. But mindfulness teaches us how to experience those emotions without letting them define us or control our actions. Think of how this plays out in real life. Let's say you've just received some difficult news, perhaps about your job or a loved one's health. In the past, you might have immediately felt overwhelmed, perhaps even spiraling into anxiety or fear. But with mindfulness, you might first notice the rush of emotions flooding in. You might feel the tightening in your chest, the rapid pulse in your temples. But instead of reacting to the emotions with panic or dread, you observe them. I notice that I feel anxious, you might say to yourself. You might also notice the urge to avoid those feelings or distract yourself with something else. But instead of pushing them away, you simply allow the emotions to be there without judgment. You don't label them as bad or wrong. You just notice them and let them pass, knowing that emotions are not permanent, they rise and they fall. In this way, mindfulness fosters emotional resilience. You don't become immune to stress or pain, but you learn how to move through it with grace and presence. You begin to see your emotions as visitors, rather than residents in your mind. When you stop judging your emotions, you allow yourself to feel them without fear. This ability to sit with discomfort, to notice it without reacting, is what gives you the resilience to handle life's ups and downs. There's also a sense of freedom that comes with non-judgmental awareness. It's the freedom to be yourself without the constant need for approval or validation. It's the freedom to experience your emotions without feeling ashamed of them. It's the freedom to be fully present in each moment, without worrying about what comes next or what went wrong in the past. When we stop judging ourselves and others, we free ourselves from the weight of expectations and the burden of self-criticism. This is the power of mindfulness. It's not about making life perfect or eliminating all the difficult emotions. It's about learning to experience life as it truly is, with all its ups and downs, without getting lost in judgment or reactivity. It's about developing the ability to face life's challenges with clarity, resilience, and compassion, both for ourselves and for others. In the end, mindfulness isn't about becoming a passive observer of life. It's about becoming an active participant in our own experience. By observing our thoughts, emotions, and sensations without judgment, we free ourselves from the chains of habitual reactivity. We gain the ability to respond thoughtfully, rather than reacting mindlessly. And in doing so, we discover a deeper, more meaningful connection with ourselves and the world around us. This is the art of attention, the ability to be present, to observe without judgment, and to cultivate resilience in the face of life's challenges. Chapter 5. Cultivating patience and trust in the process. Think about planting a seed in the ground. You carefully choose the soil, place the seed, water it, and wait. For the first few days, nothing happens. You might check on it every morning, peering at the soil, expecting to see signs of growth. But all you see is dirt. It's easy to feel frustrated in those early days, wondering if the seed is even alive, or if you've done something wrong. But slowly, over time, the seed begins to sprout, and then, finally, it breaks through the surface. The growth is gradual, but it's real. Patience, in many ways, is the essence of mindfulness. Like a seed taking root in soil, mindfulness requires a slow, consistent nurturing. In the fast-paced world we live in, we've become accustomed to instant results. Whether it's a text message reply, a fast food order, or a quick fix to a problem. But mindfulness doesn't work that way. It asks us to be patient with the process, to trust that, just like the seed, the benefits will come with time and consistent practice. This can be one of the hardest aspects of mindfulness. The need to let go of our desire for immediate results and trust that the practice is working, even when we don't see any immediate changes. Take Mia, for example. Mia had just started practicing mindfulness, and like many beginners, she expected rapid transformation. She read about the benefits. Less stress, more clarity, a sense of calm, and she wanted those benefits right away. But a few weeks into her practice, Mia found herself frustrated. She didn't feel any calmer. Her mind still wandered. She still felt anxious at times. Am I doing it wrong? She wondered. Why isn't this working for me? But instead of quitting, Mia decided to stick with it, reminding herself that the practice was a journey, not a race. It wasn't until months later, when she reflected on how she had responded to a difficult situation, that she realized how far she had come. The moments of impatience, frustration, and anxiety had become less overwhelming. She wasn't perfect, but she had learned to return to her breath and presence with greater ease. The growth, though subtle, was undeniable. Mindfulness is a process that often unfolds in ways that we can't predict. It doesn't always provide the instant relief or breakthroughs we desire. In fact, mindfulness sometimes amplifies the discomfort we feel, bringing our awareness to the very things we've been avoiding. But this is part of the process, the act of sitting with discomfort and allowing it to be, rather than pushing it away or resisting it. Just like the seed that must first break through the hard soil before it can blossom into a plant, mindfulness helps us to break through the layers of distraction, stress, and reactivity that have built up in our lives over time. The more we practice, the more we create space for growth. Trust is the other cornerstone of mindfulness. Trust, both in the practice and in ourselves, anchors our journey. It's easy to doubt the process when we don't see immediate results. We live in a culture that often rewards quick results and visible progress, but mindfulness teaches us to embrace the slow, steady path. Trusting in the process means accepting that there is no right way to practice mindfulness. There's only the way that works for you. The very act of trusting, of surrendering to the present moment, is a practice in and of itself. It requires us to let go of expectations and to simply show up. David's story illustrates the importance of trust. David had been practicing mindfulness for several months but had yet to experience any profound shifts. He didn't feel particularly peaceful, and his stress levels were still high. In fact, there were times when he felt more agitated after sitting with his thoughts than he had before he started. David started to wonder if mindfulness was just a fad, or if he was simply not cut out for it. But he continued practicing, not because he saw the immediate benefits, but because he trusted the process. He had read enough to know that mindfulness wasn't a quick fix. It was a lifelong practice. Over time, David began to notice small changes. He didn't feel as triggered by his boss's harsh emails. He was more patient with his family. And although his anxiety didn't disappear overnight, he felt a new sense of control over it. He trusted the process, and in doing so, he allowed his own growth to unfold naturally. Patience and trust are interwoven in mindfulness. When we practice patience, we allow ourselves to grow at our own pace without judgment. And when we trust in the process, we give ourselves the freedom to experience the practice without pressure. These qualities are essential for anyone who wishes to cultivate a deeper mindfulness practice, especially when challenges arise. It's normal to feel doubt at times. We're conditioned to expect immediate results, and mindfulness doesn't always deliver in that way. But the very act of continuing, of showing up on the cushion or in our daily lives, is an act of trust. Each time we come back to the present moment, we are reinforcing the belief that mindfulness is a worthwhile practice, even if we don't always see its immediate effects. In a way, the journey of mindfulness mirrors the act of gardening. You plant the seed of practice and water it consistently, even when you don't see the results. You trust that the seeds of awareness, patience, and compassion are taking root, even if they're not visible at first. And when the flower eventually blooms, it's not because you forced it, it's because you gave it the space to grow. Mindfulness is much the same. It's not about forcing your mind to be still or pushing yourself to get it right. It's about showing up, being patient with yourself, and trusting that, over time, the practice will bear fruit. Some days will be easier than others. There will be moments of doubt, frustration, and even disappointment. But these are the moments when mindfulness can teach us the most. When you feel the urge to quit or when you're overwhelmed with impatience, that's the moment to pause and take a deep breath. Remind yourself that you're not trying to fix anything. You're simply observing. You're cultivating a sense of patience, one breath at a time. And with each breath, you're trusting in the process. The beauty of mindfulness is that it's not about perfection. It's about showing up again and again, and trusting that each moment of awareness is a step toward a deeper sense of peace and presence. In the end, mindfulness is not a destination. It's a journey. And as you continue on this path, you'll find that the patience and trust you cultivate will become your greatest allies, guiding you through even the most challenging moments with grace and resilience. Just as the seed eventually sprouts and grows into something beautiful, so too will your mindfulness practice, blossoming in its own time and in its own way. Chapter 6. Mindfulness as a path to emotional healing. Imagine the raw, overwhelming feeling of grief that hits you after losing someone close. It's not just an emotional experience. It's a physical one. The weight of sadness seems to settle deep in your chest, and every breath feels like an effort. Similarly, when anger flares up, it's not merely a reaction. It's an internal explosion that radiates outwards, affecting your thoughts, actions, and relationships. Fear, too, can be paralyzing, creating an internal storm that clouds rational thinking and decision-making. These are intense, complex emotions that many of us try to avoid or push down, yet they are a natural part of the human experience. So, how does mindfulness play a role in helping us process and transform these challenging emotions? Mindfulness offers a unique and powerful approach to emotional healing by encouraging us to sit with, rather than avoid, our emotions. It's easy to think that in order to heal from anger, grief, or fear, we need to suppress or eliminate these feelings. Society often encourages us to move on, get over it, or don't cry, creating a culture where emotions are viewed as something to be fixed or avoided. But mindfulness invites us to do the opposite. It asks us to bring awareness to these emotions, to feel them fully and with acceptance, and to allow them to move through us. Take Emily, for example. Emily lost her mother to cancer several years ago. The grief was profound, almost debilitating, and it seemed like she would never find her way through it. For a long time, Emily tried to push her sadness aside. She kept busy, focused on work, and tried to avoid any situations that might trigger tears or memories. But the grief never truly went away. Instead, it lingered, appearing in unexpected moments, like when she saw a photo of her mother, or when a song reminded her of her. It felt as though the sadness was just waiting for a moment to resurface, and when it did, it was always just as painful as the first time. It wasn't until Emily took up mindfulness practice that she began to shift her relationship with her grief. In her mindfulness sessions, she was encouraged to notice her emotions as they arose without judgment. At first, it was incredibly difficult. The emotions were raw, and it felt impossible to sit with the weight of them. But slowly, Emily began to understand that mindfulness didn't require her to get rid of her grief. Instead, it asked her to notice it, to acknowledge it as it was, and to allow it to exist without pushing it away. Through consistent practice, she began to notice subtle shifts. She could sit with the grief for longer periods without feeling overwhelmed. She began to recognize moments of warmth and peace, even in the midst of the sadness. The practice didn't take away her grief, but it helped her process it in a way that allowed her to live with it more peacefully. Emily learned that emotional healing isn't about getting rid of pain. It's about accepting it, sitting with it, and allowing it to transform over time. Anger, too, is an emotion that often gets a bad reputation. We're taught to control it, to suppress it, or to vent it in ways that are often unproductive. But mindfulness offers a different approach. It encourages us to become curious about our anger. Where does it come from? What does it feel like in the body? How does it shift and change over time? When we approach anger with mindfulness, we start to realize that it's not something that we need to get rid of, but rather something we need to understand and embrace. Take Daniel's experience. Daniel had struggled with anger for most of his life. It wasn't that he was an angry person all the time, but when he did get upset, it was like a switch flipped and he would explode. His anger would surge so quickly that it often felt like he had no control over it. He would say things he didn't mean, hurt the people he loved, and feel ashamed afterward. Daniel knew that his anger was a problem, but he didn't know how to address it. It wasn't until he began practicing mindfulness that he started to understand his anger differently. Mindfulness helped Daniel become more aware of the physical sensations that preceded his outbursts. Tightness in his chest, clenching of his fists, a tightening of his jaw. By paying attention to these sensations, Daniel learned to notice his anger before it escalated. And over time, he learned to pause and breathe, to acknowledge the anger without reacting to it. Rather than reacting impulsively, Daniel began to find space between his emotional trigger and his response. He was still angry, but he didn't let the anger control him. Through mindfulness, Daniel discovered that anger didn't have to be an automatic, destructive force. It could simply be an emotion that he noticed and let pass, like any other. This shift in perspective allowed Daniel to respond to his anger with much more care, creating less harm for himself and others. Fear is another emotion that mindfulness helps us navigate. It can be paralyzing, holding us back from taking risks, from trying new things, or from fully engaging in life. Fear often thrives in uncertainty, and when we feel fearful, our minds can spiral into worst-case scenarios. But mindfulness teaches us to recognize fear when it arises and to notice the thoughts, sensations, and physical responses that accompany it. Instead of avoiding fear or trying to push it away, mindfulness encourages us to face it with curiosity and compassion. Let's look at Sarah's story. Sarah had always struggled with social anxiety. She feared judgment and criticism, and the thought of speaking in front of others would make her feel nauseous. For years, Sarah avoided situations where she might feel exposed or vulnerable. But when she began practicing mindfulness, she realized that her fear wasn't something she could fix. It was a natural response to feeling uncertain or out of control. With mindfulness, Sarah learned to observe her fear without becoming overwhelmed by it. She began to notice the tightening in her chest, the racing thoughts, and the physical discomfort that accompanied her fear. Rather than trying to escape these sensations, Sarah simply allowed them to be there. She didn't fight them. She didn't judge them. She simply noticed them with a sense of curiosity. Over time, Sarah found that the more she allowed herself to experience fear without judgment, the less power it had over her. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her. Sarah was able to step into situations that once terrified her, speaking in front of a group, engaging in difficult conversations, without letting the fear dictate her behavior. Mindfulness helped Sarah create a safe space to experience fear without being consumed by it. One of the most profound gifts of mindfulness is its ability to create space for compassion. When we practice mindfulness, we become more attuned to our own emotions and experiences. This increased awareness allows us to recognize our struggles, and rather than criticizing ourselves for them, we can respond with kindness and understanding. We learn to offer ourselves the same compassion that we would offer a friend in need. And this compassion extends to others as well. When we approach difficult emotions with mindfulness, we can see that others are struggling in similar ways. We become less judgmental, more empathetic, and more patient with ourselves and with those around us. A final story comes from Lily, who had been dealing with chronic pain for years. It wasn't until she began practicing mindfulness that she realized how much her own inner critic was contributing to her suffering. Every time her pain flared up, she would berate herself, feeling like a failure for not being able to live life as she wanted. She felt angry at her body, and that anger only made the pain worse. But mindfulness taught Lily to shift her relationship with her pain. Rather than fighting against it or judging herself for it, Lily learned to observe her pain with curiosity and compassion. She acknowledged the discomfort without seeing it as something that defined her or made her less worthy. And over time, this shift in perspective allowed Lily to experience less suffering, even in the presence of pain. She no longer felt like she was at war with her body. Instead, she learned to coexist with it, embracing the pain with compassion rather than judgment. Through mindfulness, we learn that our emotions, whether it's anger, grief, or fear, are not our enemies. They are a part of the human experience, and when we face them with presence and compassion, we allow them to heal. Mindfulness helps us process these emotions in a way that is transformative, giving us the space to feel, understand, and ultimately move through them. It's not about eliminating the difficult emotions, but about learning how to relate to them in a way that fosters healing and growth. And when we approach ourselves and others with compassion, we create the conditions for deeper emotional healing, both within and beyond ourselves. Chapter 7, Mindfulness and the Body. Somatic awareness. Our bodies carry stories. They are the silent witnesses to everything we've experienced. Joy, sorrow, stress, triumph, and heartbreak. Yet, so often, we live disconnected from our bodies. We rush through life, paying little attention to the subtle messages our bodies send us until something goes wrong. Whether it's chronic pain, illness, or fatigue. Mindfulness, however, invites us to slow down and tune into the wisdom of the body, creating a deeper connection between the mind and physical self. This practice of somatic awareness can be life-changing, offering healing not just for the mind, but for the body as well. Mindfulness encourages us to pay attention to bodily sensations with the same clarity and compassion that we would bring to our thoughts and emotions. By bringing our awareness to physical sensations, whether it's the feeling of our breath moving in and out, the tension in our shoulders, or the weight of our feet against the ground, we begin to cultivate a richer understanding of our bodies and how they communicate with us. When we are mindful of our bodies, we can begin to identify areas of tension, discomfort, or even numbness. And in doing so, we open ourselves to the possibility of healing. Take Sarah, for instance. Sarah had been dealing with chronic lower back pain for years. She had tried physical therapy, pain medications, and even yoga, but nothing seemed to alleviate the pain for long. She had grown accustomed to the discomfort, accepting it as a part of her life. However, when Sarah started practicing mindfulness, something shifted. Instead of simply trying to push through the pain, Sarah began to tune into the sensation of it. She did this through a practice called a body scan, where she slowly brought her attention to different parts of her body, starting at her toes and moving up to her head. As she did this, she noticed how the pain in her lower back was not a single sensation, but a collection of sensations, tightness, pressure, and heat. She began to notice that certain areas of her back felt more tense, while others felt more relaxed. Through the body scan, Sarah realized that her back pain was not just a physical issue. It was tied to her emotions and stress. She discovered that when she felt anxious or overwhelmed, her back would tighten, as if her body was holding on to the tension of her thoughts. This realization was transformative. Instead of just trying to treat the pain with medications or exercises, Sarah began to incorporate mindfulness into her daily routine. Whenever she felt the familiar tightness in her back, she would pause, bring her awareness to the sensation, and take a few deep breaths. She would consciously release the tension, allowing the discomfort to dissolve, even if just for a few moments. Over time, Sarah found that the back pain became less intense and less frequent. She also noticed a significant reduction in her stress levels, as she became more attuned to how her emotions and body were intertwined. In another case, we can look at Mark, who had struggled with insomnia for years. He had tried countless remedies, sleeping pills, herbal teas, and even meditation, but nothing seemed to help him sleep through the night. When Mark turned to mindfulness, he discovered that his inability to sleep was rooted in his body's response to stress. His mind was racing with worries, but his body was equally restless. His chest would tighten, his stomach would churn, and his muscles would tense up. He wasn't fully aware of these physical sensations until he began practicing mindfulness. Mark started by incorporating a body scan into his nighttime routine. As he lay in bed, he would slowly bring his awareness to each part of his body, from his toes to his head, checking in with any sensations he was experiencing. In the beginning, it felt uncomfortable. His body was so used to being in a state of tension that it was hard to relax. But with practice, Mark became more aware of where his body was holding tension, and he began to release it consciously. By focusing on his breath and allowing his body to soften, Mark was able to create a sense of calm that helped him fall asleep more easily. He also learned to become more mindful of his thoughts, noticing when they started to race and using his breath to anchor himself in the present moment. Over time, Mark's sleep improved, and he found that he woke up feeling more rested and more connected to his body. Mindfulness not only helps us become more attuned to our bodily sensations, but also plays a significant role in improving overall physical health. By reducing stress and fostering a state of relaxation, mindfulness promotes better sleep, enhances immune function, and lowers blood pressure. Research has shown that mindfulness practices can have a profound impact on physical health by improving heart health, lowering stress hormones, and reducing inflammation. It also helps increase our awareness of when we are pushing ourselves too hard, prompting us to take breaks and listen to our bodies before we reach a point of burnout. One of the key ways mindfulness supports our physical health is by teaching us to recognize the connection between stress and physical symptoms. Chronic stress is one of the leading causes of many physical ailments, including headaches, digestive issues, and high blood pressure. By becoming more aware of how stress manifests in our bodies, we can take steps to manage it before it becomes a serious health issue. For example, when we notice the familiar tightness in our shoulders or the tension in our jaw, we can use mindfulness to release that stress and prevent it from accumulating in our bodies. In addition to stress reduction, mindfulness has been shown to improve physical health in more direct ways. For example, studies have found that mindfulness can help alleviate chronic pain by changing the way we experience and respond to discomfort. When we practice mindfulness, we become less reactive to pain, viewing it as a sensation rather than something to fear or avoid. This shift in perspective can help reduce the emotional suffering associated with pain, leading to greater overall well-being. Take John, who had been living with arthritis for many years. The constant pain in his joints made everyday activities difficult, and he often found himself feeling frustrated and helpless. When he began practicing mindfulness, John discovered that the pain wasn't as intense when he approached it with curiosity rather than resistance. He learned to notice the sensations in his joints without labeling them as bad or unpleasant. Instead of resisting the pain, he focused on how it felt in his body, what it was doing in the present moment. By practicing this non-reactive awareness, John was able to reduce the emotional impact of his pain, allowing him to experience it without becoming overwhelmed by it. Over time, he also found that his physical health improved, as his ability to manage stress and reduce tension in his body allowed him to move more freely and experience less pain overall. In addition to helping with pain management, mindfulness also encourages a holistic approach to physical well-being. It reminds us to pay attention to the body as a whole, rather than just focusing on isolated symptoms or issues. By tuning into our bodies and becoming more mindful of our posture, movement, and physical habits, we can make healthier choices that promote long-term health. For example, mindfulness can help us become more aware of when we are sitting for too long, prompting us to take breaks and stretch. It can also help us notice when we are neglecting self-care, such as skipping meals or not getting enough sleep. Mindfulness also encourages a deeper connection with our senses. By paying attention to the sensations of taste, smell, touch, sight, and sound, we can cultivate a greater appreciation for the present moment and enhance our overall well-being. Whether it's savoring a meal, enjoying a walk in nature, or simply taking a deep breath, mindfulness helps us fully engage with the world around us in a way that promotes both mental and physical health. In conclusion, mindfulness is not just a practice for the mind, it is a practice for the body as well. By cultivating somatic awareness, we can reconnect with our bodies and begin to heal on a physical, emotional, and mental level. Mindfulness helps us tune into the messages our bodies are sending us, alleviating chronic pain, reducing stress, improving sleep, and fostering overall well-being. It teaches us to listen to our bodies with compassion and to approach physical discomfort not as something to be avoided, but as a natural part of our experience. Through mindfulness, we can cultivate a deeper sense of connection to ourselves, ultimately promoting holistic health and well-being. Chapter 8. The role of acceptance and letting go. Acceptance, when fully understood, holds immense power. Not the kind that binds us in apathy or passivity, but a liberating force that opens the door to peace and possibility. In a world where striving for control and resisting discomfort is often seen as strength, the practice of accepting life's impermanence and challenges can feel counterintuitive. We may find ourselves thinking, if I just work hard enough or try enough, I can fix everything. This is the mindset many of us are conditioned to follow, and yet it can lead to exhaustion, frustration, and a sense of perpetual inadequacy. Mindfulness invites us to challenge that mindset, offering a radically different approach, one rooted in the power of acceptance. But what does acceptance really mean in this context? It is often misunderstood as resignation, as though we are giving up or settling for less than we deserve. In reality, acceptance in mindfulness is about acknowledging what is without judgment, without the impulse to immediately change, fix, or escape from it. It's about opening ourselves to life's uncertainties, letting go of rigid expectations, and allowing ourselves to experience the present moment without the weight of resistance. Think of the metaphor of a river. When we are caught in the current of resistance, trying to swim upstream against the flow, it is exhausting and futile. But when we accept the river's flow, when we allow ourselves to float and move with it, we conserve energy and find a sense of peace. This is the essence of mindfulness. To let go of our struggle against the current of life and instead flow with it, trusting that life's course, while unpredictable, is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Consider the story of Mark, a successful entrepreneur who had spent most of his life pursuing achievement, control, and perfection. His business had grown rapidly, and he was constantly striving to meet ever-increasing goals. But behind the success, Mark carried a heavy burden of anxiety. He was afraid that any sign of vulnerability or imperfection would mean failure. Every challenge that came his way felt like an obstacle to overcome, a problem to solve. He resisted his own limitations and the unpredictability of life. It wasn't until Mark began practicing mindfulness that he started to understand the concept of acceptance. First, it was difficult. His mind, conditioned to solve problems, wanted to find a solution to every challenge. But through mindfulness, Mark began to notice how much energy he was investing in controlling outcomes and resisting discomfort. He began to practice allowing things to unfold as they were, without forcing them to fit his vision. Slowly, Mark started to shift his perspective. Instead of viewing obstacles as threats, he began to see them as opportunities for growth. The challenges that once felt like failures now became the building blocks for deeper learning and understanding. One of the key moments in his journey came when he faced a significant setback in his business. Rather than panicking or fighting the situation, Mark took a step back. He used mindfulness to sit with the discomfort of the moment. Instead of reacting with frustration, he simply accepted the situation as it was. This act of acceptance didn't mean giving up. It meant acknowledging that things were not as he expected, but that he could still move forward with clarity and openness. Over time, this shift in perspective helped Mark approach challenges with greater ease and resilience. Mark's story is not unique. Many people who embrace mindfulness discover that by letting go of rigid expectations and embracing uncertainty, they find a greater sense of freedom. Take Lisa, a mother of 3 young children, who had spent years trying to maintain a perfect household. She felt overwhelmed by the constant pressure to keep everything in order and to be everything for everyone. Her attempts at perfection left her exhausted and resentful. It wasn't until she discovered mindfulness that she began to realize how much energy she was spending on resisting the chaos of everyday life. Through mindfulness, Lisa learned to accept that life with young children was messy, unpredictable, and full of surprises, and that was okay. In fact, by accepting the messiness of life, Lisa found more joy in the moments she had with her children. She no longer viewed their tantrums or messes as interruptions to her day, but as part of the beautiful, imperfect dance of family life. This acceptance allowed Lisa to let go of unrealistic expectations, reducing her stress and creating space for more authentic, connected experiences. But why is acceptance so transformative in mindfulness? The answer lies in the way acceptance reframes our relationship with life's challenges. In our everyday lives, we often view discomfort, uncertainty, and change as problems to solve or avoid. We resist the difficult emotions, anger, fear, sadness, because we fear that they will overwhelm us. But when we practice acceptance, we stop trying to push these emotions away. Instead, we allow them to be present, fully aware of their existence, without trying to fix or change them. And in this space of acceptance, we create the freedom to respond to these emotions with clarity, rather than reacting impulsively or out of fear. Consider the experience of Emily, who had spent years avoiding her grief after the sudden death of her father. She didn't want to face the pain, so she kept herself busy, distracted, and in denial. But when Emily began practicing mindfulness, she started to create space for her grief. Instead of running from the sadness, she allowed herself to feel it deeply, without judgment. She didn't try to make it go away. Instead, she let the emotions come and go, like waves on the shore. Through this process of acceptance, Emily found that her grief didn't consume her. It was still painful, but it was no longer a constant source of suffering. She learned that by accepting the grief, she could move through it, not with resistance, but with compassion for herself. This concept of acceptance also extends to our relationship with others. In the fast-paced, judgmental world we live in, it's easy to fall into the trap of expecting perfection from those around us. We judge our friends, our colleagues, even our loved ones for their flaws and shortcomings. But mindfulness teaches us to accept others as they are, imperfections and all. By embracing the imperfections in others, we create space for deeper connection and empathy. When we stop judging others, we stop judging ourselves as well. This acceptance becomes a path to greater compassion for everyone in our lives. The practice of letting go is intricately tied to acceptance. To truly embrace the present moment, we must let go of the need to control every outcome. We must release our attachment to things being a certain way. Mindfulness teaches us that nothing in life is permanent. Everything is in a constant state of flux. Our experiences, our relationships, and even our emotions are all temporary. The more we cling to things, the more we suffer. By letting go, we open ourselves to the possibility of new experiences and deeper growth. Letting go does not mean abandoning responsibility or effort. It simply means relinquishing our need for control over outcomes. Through acceptance and letting go, we stop fighting against the flow of life. We stop trying to bend reality to fit our desires. Instead, we embrace life as it is, with all of its uncertainties, imperfections, and challenges. In doing so, we free ourselves from the constant strain of resistance. We stop fighting the current and allow ourselves to flow with it, trusting that, in the end, we will emerge exactly where we need to be. In conclusion, the practice of acceptance and letting go is not a passive act of resignation, but a powerful tool for finding freedom in life's uncertainties. It allows us to release the need for control and perfection and to embrace the present moment as it is. Through mindfulness, we learn to accept ourselves, others, and life's challenges with compassion and understanding. This acceptance creates space for growth, healing, and deeper connection. By letting go of rigid expectations and embracing the flow of life, we open ourselves to a world of possibilities, where peace, freedom, and joy are not distant dreams but present realities. Chapter 9. Integrating mindfulness into relationships in a world that demands constant attention. Through texts, emails, social media notifications, and endless distractions, the art of truly connecting with others can feel like a lost skill. How often do we find ourselves physically present with someone but mentally elsewhere? Our minds race with thoughts about the past, the future, or to-do lists, while the person right in front of us is left longing for true connection. In our relationships, whether romantic, familial, or friendships, this lack of presence can create a barrier, leaving both parties feeling misunderstood or disconnected. But mindfulness offers a solution, a way to bring authenticity, depth, and empathy into our interactions with others. Mindfulness, at its core, is about paying attention, attending to the present moment with full awareness and acceptance. When this practice is applied to our relationships, it can foster deeper, more meaningful connections. Through mindful presence, we become fully available to the people in our lives, creating space for them to feel heard, seen, and valued. By truly being there without distractions or judgment, we begin to experience others more profoundly and, in turn, experience ourselves more clearly. Consider the story of Julia and Tom, a couple who had been together for several years. Over time, their relationship had become strained. Their conversations felt like routines, disconnected exchanges filled with assumptions, distractions, and surface-level interactions. When Tom would speak, Julia often found herself thinking about the next thing she needed to say, or lost in the responsibilities of the day. She wasn't really listening. She was only half present. Likewise, Tom felt like Julia wasn't really there with him either. There was a growing distance, even though they were living under the same roof. It wasn't until they both attended a mindfulness workshop that they began to understand the root of their disconnect. One of the practices they learned was mindful listening, really focusing on what the other person was saying, without the urge to respond immediately or judge their words. They practiced sitting with each other in silence, paying full attention to their words, their body language, and the emotions beneath the surface. For Julia, it was a revelation. She realized how often she would listen to Tom, but with the goal of preparing her reply rather than truly hearing him. Tom, too, began to notice how much he had shut down emotionally over time, retreating into a place where he didn't feel the need to be vulnerable, knowing that their conversations often felt transactional. Mindful listening allowed them to slow down, to tune in fully, and to respond with empathy. They started to communicate more openly, without the usual walls of defensiveness or distraction. What they discovered through this process was that the act of being truly present with one another allowed them to share deeper emotions and thoughts, ones they hadn't even realized were important. It was as though mindfulness had cracked open a door that had been closed for years. As they began to practice this presence in their conversations, they found that they were more attuned to each other's needs, more compassionate in their responses, and more deeply connected. Mindfulness also offers tools to help us navigate conflict in a healthier way. Arguments and disagreements are an inevitable part of any relationship, but how we engage with them can make all the difference. When we are not mindful, conflict often escalates, leading to miscommunication, resentment, or emotional harm. But when we approach conflict with mindfulness, we shift from reactivity to response. Instead of allowing our emotions to drive us into knee-jerk reactions, we pause, reflect, and choose a more thoughtful, compassionate approach. Take the example of Mark and Sarah, business partners who had been working together for several years. Despite their close working relationship, they had frequent disagreements that stemmed from a lack of communication and understanding. In one particularly heated exchange, Mark's frustration boiled over, and he snapped at Sarah. Rather than retaliating with anger, Sarah took a moment to breathe and center herself. She paused, aware of her own emotional reaction, and instead of matching Mark's energy with defensiveness, she calmly acknowledged his frustration. She didn't dismiss his feelings or argue back. She simply reflected, "I can see that you're really upset. Let's take a moment to calm down, and then we'll figure this out together." This response, rooted in mindfulness, completely shifted the dynamic of the conversation. By staying present, not reacting impulsively, and acknowledging the emotional energy in the room, Sarah created a space for Mark to process his feelings, and for the two of them to resolve the issue without escalating the conflict. It wasn't about winning the argument. It was about maintaining connection and understanding, even in moments of tension. In this way, mindfulness doesn't just prevent conflict from spiraling. It actively transforms how we approach difficult moments, fostering resolution and collaboration instead of division. Mindfulness also plays a key role in repairing relationships after hurtful experiences. When someone we care about has hurt us, it's easy to slip into blame, resentment, or defensiveness. But mindfulness invites us to pause before reacting and, instead, create space for deeper understanding and compassion. It's through this pause that we begin to examine our own emotions, reflect on our reactions, and respond from a place of clarity and empathy, rather than from hurt or anger. Consider the story of Elena and Carlos, who had been best friends for years, but had a falling out after a misunderstanding. Elena felt betrayed by something Carlos had said, and Carlos felt unjustly accused. For a while, they didn't speak, each nursing their wounds. But then, Elena decided to reach out, using mindfulness to guide her through the difficult conversation. She took time to reflect on her feelings before speaking to Carlos. Instead of blaming or accusing him, she approached him with an open heart. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she began. "I realized that I may have misunderstood you, and I'm sorry for the hurt I caused." Carlos, equally aware of his own emotions, listened with presence and acknowledged his own mistakes. This mindfulness-driven conversation allowed them to repair the bond between them. Instead of focusing on who was right or wrong, they both approached the situation with a mindset of compassion, understanding, and accountability. Their ability to show up fully for one another, without judgment and with a willingness to hear each other's perspectives, became the foundation for healing and rebuilding their friendship. One of the greatest gifts of mindfulness in relationships is the ability to cultivate empathy. When we are fully present with someone, we are able to see them in a deeper, more compassionate light. We can sense their needs, their struggles, their joy, and their pain, not through assumptions or judgments, but through genuine connection. Mindfulness fosters the kind of empathy that allows us to respond to others with kindness and understanding, even when we don't agree with them or share their perspective. For example, Emily, a therapist, used mindfulness to connect with a client who had been struggling with anxiety. In their sessions, Emily practiced deep listening, truly attuning herself to the client's fears and frustrations. She didn't offer advice or try to fix the situation immediately. Instead, she held space for the client's feelings, offering validation and compassion. This presence, more than any advice or strategy, made the client feel seen and understood. It allowed them to explore their emotions without shame or judgment, and it ultimately helped them work through their anxiety with more clarity and confidence. Mindfulness in relationships doesn't just benefit the person practicing it. It transforms the dynamics of the relationship itself. By bringing presence, empathy, and understanding into our interactions, we create a deeper, more authentic connection with others. We stop living on autopilot, disconnected from the people around us, and instead begin to show up fully, with heart and mind open. We listen without judgment, respond without defensiveness, and approach conflicts with the intention of resolution, not victory. In conclusion, integrating mindfulness into relationships is a practice that has the potential to profoundly deepen our connections with others. It invites us to truly be present with the people in our lives, creating space for empathy, understanding, and compassion. Through mindful listening, navigating conflict with care, and repairing bonds with clarity and kindness, we transform our relationships from surface-level exchanges into meaningful, authentic connections. Mindfulness allows us to show up for others in a way that is grounded in presence, love, and mutual respect, building relationships that are not just functional, but truly fulfilling. Chapter 10. Sustaining the practice mindfulness for life. Mindfulness is not a destination. It is a way of being, a practice that, when nurtured, can flow seamlessly into the rhythm of daily life. Yet, in the midst of life's demands, from deadlines to family obligations to the constant hum of technology, maintaining a consistent mindfulness practice can feel like a daunting task. So how do we keep mindfulness alive amidst the busy, noisy world that so often pulls us in 1,000 directions? The key is to approach mindfulness not as a separate task to be checked off, but as a lived experience that we can weave into the very fabric of our everyday lives. In this chapter, we will explore strategies for maintaining a consistent mindfulness practice, share the stories of long-term practitioners who have made mindfulness an integral part of their lives, and address the common pitfalls that many encounter on the path: complacency, over-intellectualizing, and the inevitable distractions. One of the most significant challenges that people face when it comes to sustaining mindfulness is finding the time to practice. It's easy to get caught in the trap of believing that mindfulness requires a formal, structured session, a meditation retreat, or a dedicated hour every morning. While these structured practices certainly have their benefits, they can also set us up for failure if we place too much emphasis on them. Life, with all its demands, often doesn't cooperate with our best intentions. Work, family, social obligations, these can easily overshadow the best of intentions. But mindfulness, when fully embraced, can fit into the nooks and crannies of everyday life. The key is in shifting our perception of what mindfulness practice looks like. For example, take the story of Sarah, a mother of 2 young children and a full-time teacher. For years, Sarah struggled to maintain a consistent meditation practice. She had the best intentions, but between her job, her family, and household responsibilities, finding quiet moments to meditate felt nearly impossible. Initially, she tried to carve out 20-minute blocks of time in the morning, but those sessions often went by the wayside as the realities of motherhood and work took precedence. However, rather than abandoning the practice altogether, Sarah reframed mindfulness as something that could be integrated into her day, rather than compartmentalized into specific times. She began to practice mindfulness while washing the dishes, being fully present with the sensations of water running over her hands, the warmth of the soap, the rhythmic motion of scrubbing. She practiced mindful breathing while waiting for her morning coffee to brew, tuning into the smells, the sounds, the steam rising from the cup. These small shifts, these micro-practices, didn't require additional time. They simply invited Sarah to slow down and be fully present, even in the midst of her busy life. Over time, these moments of mindfulness accumulated and began to shape her entire approach to life. Rather than viewing mindfulness as something that required a separate, dedicated space, Sarah learned that mindfulness could be a constant companion, woven into the everyday flow of her life. It was no longer about finding time to practice. It was about bringing attention and awareness to the present moment, no matter what she was doing. This is one of the greatest gifts of mindfulness: its accessibility. You don't need to sit on a cushion for hours to reap its benefits. Mindfulness can be practiced while walking, driving, eating, talking with friends, or even washing the dishes. As long as we bring our full attention to the present moment, we are practicing mindfulness. This continuous practice allows mindfulness to transform from a formal meditation session into a sustainable way of being. Another critical component of sustaining a mindfulness practice is navigating the inevitable obstacles that arise. For long-term practitioners, the journey of mindfulness is not always smooth or linear. There are times when the practice feels effortless, when every moment seems infused with clarity and calm. But there are also times when the mind wanders incessantly, when distractions take over, and when doubt creeps in, making the practice feel futile. One of the most common pitfalls is complacency, when the initial excitement of mindfulness wanes and the practice starts to feel routine or uninteresting. This is when people often abandon the practice or let it slip into the background. Take the example of James, a software engineer who began practicing mindfulness several years ago. Initially, he felt a deep sense of transformation. He was able to manage stress better, engage more deeply with his colleagues, and sleep more soundly. However, after a few years, the novelty began to wear off. James found himself going through the motions of his practice without the same sense of connection or mindfulness that he had felt at the beginning. He would sit for his meditation sessions, but his mind would wander constantly, and he would get frustrated with himself for not being able to achieve the calm he had experienced early on. The turning point for James came when he realized that the very nature of mindfulness is not about achieving a particular state of mind, but about being present with whatever is arising in the moment. Whether his mind was calm or agitated, whether he was experiencing joy or frustration, mindfulness was about accepting whatever came up with non-judgmental awareness. Once he made this shift, James was able to approach his practice with a renewed sense of openness, even when it felt challenging. The key, he realized, was not to expect mindfulness to always feel the same, but to approach it with curiosity and patience, trusting that the process itself was the practice. Another common challenge that many practitioners face is the tendency to over-intellectualize mindfulness. It's easy to get caught up in reading books, listening to podcasts, and watching videos about mindfulness, thinking that the more information we consume, the better we will be at practicing it. However, the more we intellectualize mindfulness, the more we can distance ourselves from the actual practice. Mindfulness is experiential. It's something we must live and feel, not just think about. Take the example of Lisa, an avid mindfulness enthusiast who had read countless books and attended numerous workshops on the topic. Despite all of her knowledge, she found herself struggling to implement mindfulness in her day-to-day life. She was constantly analyzing her experiences, trying to figure out mindfulness, rather than simply experiencing it. Lisa's breakthrough came when she realized that mindfulness is not about knowing more. It's about being more. It's about experiencing the present moment with all its fullness, without trying to dissect or analyze it. Once Lisa let go of the need to overthink her practice, she found a deep sense of freedom. She began to experience mindfulness in a more fluid, natural way, without pressure, without expectation, simply being. The final strategy for sustaining mindfulness is the cultivation of trust. Trust in the practice itself, trust in the process, and trust in your ability to remain present, even when it feels difficult. As with any meaningful practice, mindfulness takes time to cultivate. It's a lifelong journey, not a quick fix. But with consistent practice, even in the midst of challenges, the benefits become clear. Consider the story of Michael, a long-term mindfulness practitioner who had been practicing for over a decade. He had experienced the ups and downs of the practice, times of deep peace, times of restlessness, times when he felt like he was moving forward and times when he felt stuck. But over the years, Michael had come to trust that, regardless of the momentary fluctuations in his experience, mindfulness was always there. It was always available to him, even in the most chaotic of moments. His mindfulness practice had become a constant source of refuge, a steady anchor in the storm. Sustaining a mindfulness practice is about making it an integral part of our daily lives. Finding moments to be present in everything we do, trusting the process, and showing up with openness, patience, and curiosity. It's about realizing that mindfulness is not just a practice but a way of being. Whether we are meditating, walking, working, or simply breathing, mindfulness is always available to us. By embracing mindfulness in its many forms, we can cultivate a life that is more intentional, more compassionate, and more connected to the present moment. And as we do so, we discover that the peace, clarity, and joy we seek are already within us, waiting to be experienced, right here, right now. Conclusion. The timeless gift of mindfulness. As we draw this journey to a close, it's important to pause and reflect on the essence of what we've explored, the timeless gift of mindfulness. From its humble beginnings in ancient Buddhist traditions to its transformative, evidence-based practices in modern-day life, mindfulness has proven to be more than just a technique or trend. It is a profound way of being, a simple yet powerful tool for navigating the complexities of the human experience. The beauty of mindfulness lies in its accessibility. It does not demand perfection, nor does it require us to be anything other than what we are in this very moment. What it asks is simple, that we show up fully with presence, with awareness, and with kindness toward ourselves and others. Revisiting the opening story, remember the person who, overwhelmed by life's chaotic pace, felt disconnected from themselves and the present moment? The same individual who, by embracing mindfulness, found clarity, peace, and connection? This person, much like many of us, was initially unaware that the very peace they longed for was always within their grasp. The simple act of paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment and without judgment, held the potential to transform their experience of life. By turning inward and choosing to be present, this person discovered not only peace, but an entirely new way of relating to their world. Mindfulness allowed them to break free from the tyranny of constant doing and allowed them, for the first time, to just be. In the chapters that followed, we've seen how mindfulness works on multiple levels, how it shifts our attention, rewires our brain, and allows us to live in a state of greater balance and awareness. From the science that explains the changes occurring in our neural pathways to the stories of real people facing struggles and overcoming them through mindfulness, we've learned that this practice is a path to emotional healing, to resilience, and to living a fuller, more engaged life. We've also learned that mindfulness is not reserved for moments of calm or stillness, but can be integrated into every aspect of our lives, from our relationships to our work, our physical health, and even our emotional well-being. But mindfulness is not a quick fix or a miracle cure. It requires patience, trust, and a willingness to embrace discomfort, imperfection, and uncertainty. Along the way, we may encounter obstacles, restlessness, doubt, complacency, but these are not roadblocks. They are part of the journey. By continuing to practice, even in the face of difficulty, we discover the very power of mindfulness. We realize that mindfulness is not about achieving a particular state, but about embracing the full spectrum of our human experience, with all its beauty and all its messiness. As we come to the end of this exploration, I invite you to reflect on your own life. Consider the moments where you feel disconnected, overwhelmed, or stuck. What might it be like to bring your full attention to those moments, to approach them with curiosity rather than judgment, to embrace them as they are without the need to change or fix anything? What if you could live each day with greater awareness, with more presence, and with deeper compassion for yourself and others? What would it feel like to wake up to the truth that everything you need for peace, for healing, and for transformation is already within you? The journey toward mindfulness begins with a single step, an open mind, a willingness to embrace the present moment, and a deep, unwavering belief that there is a way forward, no matter where you are in life. The tools we've explored in this book are not just theoretical. They are practical, they are real, and they are waiting for you to begin. Whether you take 5 minutes a day to sit in quiet meditation or bring mindfulness to your everyday activities, the practice is yours to claim. The moment to begin is now. Mindfulness is not something that can be postponed or delayed. It is a gift that is available to us in every moment, waiting patiently for us to receive it. It is not about striving to become someone we are not, but about embracing the fullness of who we already are. Are you ready to receive this gift? Are you ready to bring mindfulness into your life and discover the profound peace, clarity, and connection that await you? The door to mindfulness is open. The practice is simple yet transformative. All it requires is your willingness to step through and begin. So I leave you with this: the time is now. The gift of mindfulness is waiting for you. Will you open the door and step into a life of greater presence, awareness, and joy? This is your invitation. The journey is yours to begin, today, in this very moment.